Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 676. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about mussels and U-boats and wine, Huguenots, the Three Musketeers, and then Plantagenet Kings as we go to La Rochelle in France. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Let's talk about La Rochelle. I'd like to welcome to the show Jacob Kell, who is a luxury travel advisor at facilitateluxury.com. And Jacob has come to talk to us about La Rochelle in France. Jacob, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. I'm glad to be here.
And what's your connection with La Rochelle?
Well, it goes way back. I originally studied there to learn French. I spent a semester studying at the University of La Rochelle, and that's when I really got to learn the language, learn the culture, and then get to explore what still today is one of my favorite cities.
Excellent. And can you put it on the map for people who are not familiar with this city?
La Rochelle is on the Bay of Biscayne. It's on the west coast of France.
Mm-hmm.
It's about 2 hours from Bordeaux, if you're familiar with Bordeaux, and it's closer to Spain, about an hour north of Biarritz, which is on the border with Spain. So it's a beautiful coastal Atlantic town, still some cold Atlantic water, which we'll touch on later.
Excellent. And I have to say that the first time I heard of La Rochelle was probably in the movie The Three Musketeers or The Four Musketeers way back in the 70s or something like that, as a town that the Musketeers were besieging because it was a Protestant town in a Catholic country. But why should someone go to La Rochelle today?
Well, I really like to recommend La Rochelle first-time visitors to France. I think it's the perfect city to provide an authentic cultural experience without some of the struggles that we might find elsewhere in France.
Struggles?
Hey, I don't like to say struggles, but France can be off-putting or a little intense for a first-timer. The culture is rather closed off.
Paris is really what we're thinking about here.
Yes.
Okay. Paris is to France as New York City is to U.S. in terms of reputation. Excellent. And what kind of itinerary would you recommend for us in La Rochelle?
Well, you can really spend probably a week in and around La Rochelle. There's lots to see, lots to do, and great cities and islands nearby that you can also spend some time in. One of the itineraries I like to recommend is either flying into France or flying into Nice and doing a long drive around the outer edges of France. It's a beautiful way to see the country, and La Rochelle is a highlight on the routes that I recommend. But particularly as part of an itinerary, it's best matched with Bordeaux. A lot of people want to go to Bordeaux, the city, for the history there, and then, of course, for the wine region. And La Rochelle is perfectly situated as kind of a more calm getaway. It does get busy in the summer season. It's a popular destination for French people. And surrounding La Rochelle, there's such places as Nantes, Rochefort, Ile-de-Ré, Biarritz. All of these towns are in close proximity and make for excellent day trips or stops in part of a larger itinerary.
Excellent. Let's go into that in a little more detail. Where are we going to start? Are we going to start in La Rochelle itself, or did you want to start someplace else?
I would start in Bordeaux.
Okay. And we have done another show on Bordeaux, just for those of you who are listening. So if you want more detail on Bordeaux than we're going to cover here, I will refer you to a link to that, which I'll put in the show notes and also in the lyrics of this episode. So you're starting us in Bordeaux, where a lot of people will be going anyway.
Absolutely. And Bordeaux is obviously easy to get to from Paris or elsewhere in France. Starting with Bordeaux, obviously, that's the improved version of Paris for me. It's a large city, but it has the same cultural diversity, which is astounding, but it's much more quiet. It's astonishingly quiet. I love Bordeaux City. But really, my favorite village in terms of the wine experience, which is what a lot of us are going to Bordeaux for, is Saint-Émilion. Saint-Émilion is one of the most quaint, small towns I've ever seen. Really romantic with the old stone streets and the buildings. It's very tiny. You can walk the whole thing, and it's nothing but good food and boutiques with amazing wine.
Well, and you mentioned that Bordeaux was easy to get to. And stop me if I'm wrong, I believe there's a high-speed train from Paris to Bordeaux?
Yeah, the TGV runs from Paris to Bordeaux. I think you can do it in 2.5 hours or so.
So you could fly, but it might even just be faster depending on whether you're coming from the airport that you flew into or from the city itself to hop on a train.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
I often recommend the train.
Yeah, and they're very pleasant in France. Last time I was in France, we took it all the way from Normandy down into the southern part of France, and so spent the whole day on the train, but crossed the whole country, so it wasn't a big deal at all.
Absolutely. And then once you're in Bordeaux, you can easily take the train to La Rochelle.
Okay, and that's going to be more of a local train, or is the TGV also go there? Okay.
No TGV. Then you get on the local trains at that point.
Excellent. And when we get to La Rochelle, what are we going to do?
So La Rochelle is loaded, but it's easy to work with. It's a very walkable town. The first highlights that you're definitely going to see is the old harbor, the old port. This is surrounded by a street called Quai du Perret, which is the road that runs along the port. And there's a lot of restaurants facing it. It's a beautiful place to sit, to eat, to people watch, to look at the boats. And this is the main area of La Rochelle. And one of the biggest highlights consists of 3 towers. And these were fortifications that date back, well, La Rochelle, I think, dates back to the 12th century. And these are a little bit later, military fortifications that consist of 3 towers, Tour Saint-Nicolas, Tour de la Lanterne, and Tour de la Chaîne. And these are iconic of the city. So when you see La Rochelle featured in publications or images, this is what you see.
Well, and when you talk about this being a small town, a small harbor too, I'm looking at an aerial picture of it, and my impression is I could walk around the whole harbor in, well, from one tower to the other in 15 minutes or something like that.
That's spot on. That area is really easy. And one of the best parts once you're there, there's two streets that everyone should know about.
Mm-hmm.
Good for dining, shopping. The first one is called Rue Saint-Jean-du-Perrot. And so this is right off Quai du Perret, which is that main road I was talking about. And when you walk back, it's an alleyway, and this is where you're going to find a lot of really, really great restaurants. One of my favorites is called Les Quatre Sergents. It's a little bit upscale. It's well regarded in the city. Very nice food. Another one is La Fleur du Sel on the same road. These are excellent dining options.
Fleur de sel, the flower of the salt?
Yes.
Okay. I was just trying to work out why someone would name it that, but okay.
Well, actually, Fleur de Sel is a regional product.
Okay. Well, that answers my next question. Okay.
It's a very fine sea salt that's produced in the region.
Okay. Well, and speaking of regional, what should we order when we're in La Rochelle? I don't know anything about regional specialties in this particular part of France.
Well, my favorite's oysters. You got to get some oysters. Really fresh, cold water oysters. There's two main varieties. The first being Ile de Ré, coming from Ile de Ré, and Ile d'Oléron, which is another island where these famous oysters are harvested. So at a lot of the restaurants along the port, you'll be able to get fresh oysters. They're absolutely delicious. Another popular dish is mussels, of course. And there's a regional recipe for the Charente region, which is where the region that La Rochelle is in. It's called moule charentaise. And this is a cream and white wine sauce. Those are two famous dishes.
When you talk about that being the region, that's the modern department that La Rochelle is in. It's from the ancient region of Aquitaine and was part of England for a long time during the Plantagenets, way back there in the 12th century or so. Then the revolution happens and everything gets redivided up. But okay. This is not a history podcast, just a travel podcast by somebody who loves history. Okay. Anything else we're going to try while we're in La Rochelle?
There's one specific fortified wine I think you should try. It's very, very local. It's called Pinot, Pineau. It's really a cross between cognac, brandy, and wine.
Okay. It's still a wine, but it's like a port. They put additional alcohol in.
Correct. Quite sweet.
Okay. Again, like a port. Okay, got it.
The other two things you should know is that in this region, we're very close to cognac.
Okay.
So if you're into cognac, this is definitely a good time to try it. In addition to goat cheese, there's one specifically, it's called Chabichou, regionally produced goat cheese. And then butter is also a big deal here. Okay.
So a big dairy region in general then. And we'll get a baguette or something like that for our butter in traditional France fashion, or is there something more specific in La Rochelle?
I'll even recommend where to go and enjoy the picnic.
Excellent.
There's a couple of really beautiful spots in town to enjoy a picnic or to just enjoy the scenery and to take a walk. The first would be Allée du Mail. And this is a street that runs along the beach, but it's a residential street. And there's a lot of really beautiful old homes that line the road. And there's a large park in the middle of it. It's a really great place to visit. This is where you also find the Casino du Berrière on one end, next to the beach. It's a very nice area to see the homes. And then there's a very large park called Le Parc Charrier. It's a big, beautiful park, great for exercising, strolling, relaxing. A wonderful place to stop for a picnic.
Okay. And Allée du Mail, is there something special about the month of May in La Rochelle?
Yes, and this goes back to World War II.
Okay, I saw that there was a siege of La Rochelle. Okay, got it.
So there's a unique history there, and there's also one museum worth checking out if you're into the war history.
Mm-hmm.
And this is called Le Bunker de la Roche.
Okay.
It's on Rue des Dames, and this was a bunker that was used by the Nazis, and it sits beneath Rue des Dames, so it's quite small when you're in there. It's now a museum, but it has some of the best preserved frescoes in the city that have been sitting perfectly preserved for 70 years.
Interesting.
So it's an interesting sight to see.
Well, and you talk about the World War II history. So La Rochelle, being a port city, was used to house or harbor U-boats, whatever the correct term is there, during World War II, the German submarines that go out and sink Allied shipping. And so it was finally liberated in May. I wondered if that's where the May was coming from in Allée de Mai.
It is. At the end of Allée de Mai, there's a small memorial, if I remember correctly. I was going to say, just as you were talking about the port being used as a harbor by the Nazis, if you go a little bit north of the city, you'd have to drive there. It's a short distance. It's still considered in La Rochelle. There's a location where the Nazi U-boats were stored.
I saw that was still in existence. That would be interesting for a history buff like me to see.
Yeah.
Excellent. What else are you going to recommend we see in La Rochelle itself?
In my opinion, France does museums absolutely wonderfully. I'm not a big museum guy, but there's a couple in La Rochelle that I do recommend that I very much enjoyed. The first one is the Musée du Nouveau Monde, Museum of the New World. La Rochelle had its boom of wealth during the triangular trade with the New World.
So with the triangular trade being the slave trade, so slaves to molasses to rum with the New World. In the Caribbean then, mostly.
In the Caribbean and a little bit in the southern United States.
Okay.
There is a link between La Rochelle and Charleston, and I live in Charleston.
Okay. What is the link between La Rochelle and Charleston? You have me intrigued.
Well, and I think you touched on this earlier with the French Protestants.
Ah, okay.
When the Protestants fled France, the Huguenots, a lot of them fled to South Carolina. The Huguenot Society of South Carolina is actually based here in Charleston, and these are the remnants of that fleeing of France a long time ago.
I did not know that.
I learned French here in Charleston too, and I have professors that taught me that. But it's an uncommon, quiet history.
Excellent. What else are we going to see in La Rochelle?
Another really beautiful art museum that I love is Musée des Beaux-Arts. This is a smaller museum, but it's stocked with about almost 1,000 paintings, and not big names, but just really beautiful historical pieces.
Well, fine art museum, so we're talking classical art or more modern art?
No, this is classical, a lot of Renaissance era paintings, and beautiful place to see.
Excellent. We've talked about art and history. We've got people sorted out in terms of some restaurants to go to. Any other places we want to touch on some of the history from La Rochelle?
The most important parts we've gone over.
Okay.
One thing I failed to mention, which is a big sight to see, is that when you're in the old port and you look up against the wall of buildings, you'll find the Grosse Horloge, which is the big clock tower that separates the buildings lining the port to the maze of city streets behind them. And so when you decide to walk into the city, you walk underneath the Grosse Horloge, and now we're in a whole new space, and you can start getting lost meandering the streets. It's one of the most walkable towns I can imagine, and it's loaded with everything from antique stores to more restaurants in typical French fashion.
Is there a particular street you would head us down, or a quest that we should make of something we should find while we're in La Rochelle, wandering the tiny streets?
I would make your way to the mayor's office in La Rochelle, Le Mairie. This is a beautiful building.
Okay.
This is the central hub of the city. And so if you make your way here, you'll find yourself in the midst of it all. And what I always recommend people is go get lost and see where it takes you. La Rochelle's an easy, perfect place to do that.
Any other sites we want to see before we go out to some of the things you were recommending outside of the city?
Those are my top picks. I do want to mention it's an interesting dive bar. It's an important part of the city. It's called La Guignette. Not for everybody. It's more of a university hangout.
Okay.
And
Now you have me intrigued with not for everybody. There's a longer story there about.
we spent a lot of time there. I spent a lot of time indulging there with my Chinese friends
Okay.
who are also learning French. It's a fun place, wooden barrels, and they make their own effervescent wine.
Okay.
It's more of a wine / fruit flavored concoction that's with
More
bubbles.
of a spritzer or something. Okay.
And they bottle this up. It's very inexpensive.
Hence the student hangout.
This is where students hang out. It's worth checking out. It's worth trying. One of the other streets there I wanted to mention is Rue Saint Nicolas, which is on the opposite side of the port from the previous street I suggested, Rue Saint Jean de Perrot. And Rue Saint Nicolas has several more great restaurants. And one of my favorite Italian places is actually located here. If you need a break from French, try Ragazzi da Pepone. Real good Italian place.
Okay, well then let's leave the city. Where would you have us go?
I think the first stop should be Ile de Ré. Ile de Ré is an island off the coast of La Rochelle, probably about a 30-minute drive.
Connected by a bridge, in other words.
Yes. The whole island is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's very well protected. What people do need to know if they are driving is there is a fee to use the bridge over, and it's relatively expensive. I think it might be around 15 euros. Otherwise, take the bus. It's an elevated fare, maybe around 4 euros. You can get there easily. Once you're on Ile de Ré, there's a town called Saint Martin du Ré. Saint Martin du Ré.
Mm-hmm.
This is another quaint fishing village, a small port, beautiful sights to see, a lot of great restaurants, fresh seafood. This is a great day trip. And if you're going during the summer to Ile de Ré, you can enjoy the beaches. The island does fill up. It's a popular vacation destination. And if you're into biking, it's a beautiful island to bike through. The sand dunes are very well protected. It's a gorgeous day trip. That's what I would recommend. Go for the day to Ile de Ré. Very enjoyable place. And then moving further outside of La Rochelle, a little bit longer to the north, is a town called Rochefort. And if you are into American history and you're familiar with Marquis de Lafayette, the ship in which he sailed to America with, called Hermione, what they have in Rochefort is a replica of the original ship. And I think it was built in 1780. It's a really cool thing to see. If you're into the history, I'd recommend visiting Rochefort.
Marquis de Lafayette is a very interesting figure. I think he was 18 when he came over to fight in the American Revolution. And at first, my impression from the history I've read is that Washington really wanted nothing to do with this young man who came over from France, who was so young and such. And yet he had training, and he was ultimately very, very useful to the revolution, including helping get a sponsorship from France for the revolution, which definitely was needed to win it. I don't think he was responsible for it. I wouldn't go that far, but it certainly didn't hurt that he was fighting alongside the Americans.
Absolutely.
Interesting history, actually, where he finally comes back to the U.S. as an older man after we had gone through a really rough time politically. There was a time when we were not all united in the U.S. in terms of our politics, if you can imagine. Marquis de Lafayette came back as one of the last remaining men who fought in the Revolution. And if you go around to the U.S. and you find a Lafayette, Louisiana, and a Lafayette this and a Lafayette Park and all those things, a lot of them would be named after him when he came back to the U.S. as an older man. And there was just a great celebration of him, and through him, a celebration of all those who fought the Revolution who were no longer with them at the time.
It's so easy for people to forget how close we were with the French when our country was founded.
for a short period of time until the revolution when it all got a little more complicated.
Oh, yeah.
Excellent. Where should we go next?
Really fun drive that I did when I was living in La Rochelle was into the region of Dordogne.
And we have done another show on the Dordogne. So if you're interested in more about what you're about to hear from Jacob, consider that. So you're driving to the east.
Well, it's east of Bordeaux.
So south and east. Okay.
Yep. When I picture rolling hills and fog and ducks and rivers, this is where you're at. It's shockingly quiet with really old chateaus dotting the countryside.
In towns like Bergerac, which some of you who have heard of Cyrano de Bergerac might have heard of that town if you know nothing about it.
Bergerac is one town. Périgueux is another town. A lot of smaller ones dotting the countryside. One that is medieval called Sarlat.
Mm-hmm.
This is another great place to visit. And now I want to skip to the other side of Bordeaux. Further south is Biarritz. That's another fun place. This is where we would take the train from La Rochelle, pass through Bordeaux, continue south to Biarritz. Biarritz is a popular getaway for the British in France.
And I want to say beach town.
Beach town, yes. Casino town. There's a little ritz and glamour here.
Mm-hmm. Although you mentioned that we're on the Atlantic and not the Mediterranean, so the water here is chillier.
The water here is cold, absolutely. But I'm sure it's refreshing during the summer.
Mm-hmm.
Biarritz is a fun getaway. And even further south, a little bit longer, you can cross over into San Sebastian and Spain. You can cut through the Pyrenees. I've had friends that have done this. They loved it. So you've really got a lot of options right in this location.
Now, is it possible to do that as a day trip from La Rochelle, or this seems more like an overnight by the time we get down here?
I would do an overnight.
Okay. Because I'm probably taking a local train at this point, so it's a couple hours.
These are local trains. Definitely stay overnight in Biarritz.
So we mentioned this as being the ancient area of Aquitaine. If I wanted to find my inner Plantagenet and find this history that I would find from that time period, which probably means castles, where would I go in the region of La Rochelle?
I'd go into Cognac.
Okay. Not just about drinking.
Well,
not just about drinking.
there's some good beverages to be had. But what you'll find in Cognac, for example, the Royal Castle of Cognac and Château de Bagnolet, these are older medieval castles. And Cognac and Dordogne, as I previously mentioned, are both dotted with castles.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Cognac would also make a great day trip from La Rochelle. You get out there in a couple hours.
And where does one do tastings? I know a lot of the French wineries are just now starting to have tasting rooms. 20 years ago, it was an unknown thing. Where can I do that in Cognac?
You've got to do some research. There's a few different houses that will offer tastings.
By appointment, or can I walk in?
Some of them do walk-ins.
Okay.
I'd recommend making an appointment.
Okay.
I recommend making an appointment. That's my travel advisor's side of me. However, I've done the opposite before.
Okay.
I've done it in wine country. Driving along, if you see a house, a producer, if they have signage as though they're a business, drive up. As long as you're in working day, drive up, knock, see who's there. I've always had a warm reception, and I've had some of the best tastings ever doing just this, where it's normally a family that operates it,
mm-hmm.
and they'll sit you down and pour out their product and let you taste it. They want to sell you something, and I've been shown the whole process. There was an older gentleman who was very proud of the new equipment that he had purchased. Took me in the back and showed me how he made it, and his daughter was the one pouring us wine. It was an incredible experience.
Well, and you talk about the process, so we've now gone past the wine process, and now we're into distilling, because Cognac is a distilled wine. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, double distilled. I'm reading. Okay, that I did not. In other words, you're going to want a designated driver if you're driving out here. If we're going to be tasting all day, one of you should be drinking soft drinks. But
Yeah. Or we get a driver and
or we get a tour. Yep, exactly.
set up a private tasting tour. That's always a lot of fun.
And potentially gets us home easier at night.
That's the goal.
Excellent. Is there any other places you want to hit before we get to some of our wrap-up questions? It sounds like we're starting to wind down here.
I think I've got in a lot.
Well, as we get to some of our wrap-up questions here, if I tell you you're standing in the prettiest spot in or around La Rochelle, where are you standing and what are you looking at?
Do I have to be standing, Chris?
Standing is optional. Standing is optional.
I would be seated on Quai du Perret.
Okay. Which is the road around the harbor.
Around the harbor.
Okay.
Yep. I would be on a terrace of a restaurant. I would be there near sunset.
Okay.
I'd be watching people stroll the quay. I'd have a glass of white Bordeaux in hand. And I would be enjoying some fresh oysters from Ile de Ré. That's my ideal setting. A relaxing evening in La Rochelle, taking in the harbor, taking in the three towers that are iconic to the city, and enjoying the people watching.
Excellent. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in La Rochelle.
One thing that makes me laugh would be the Chinese students playing Uno at the bar.
Okay. We're back at the student bar. Sure.
It's worth noting that La Rochelle is a university town, and the University of La Rochelle is a big school, and it's well known for its language programs.
Ah, okay. So that's why I have a lot of Chinese students. Okay.
You have a lot of international students that come here to learn French, a fair amount of Chinese, Russian,
At least an American or two.
Spanish, and then I was with a small group of Americans at the time.
Mm-hmm.
There's a good amount of bars that cater to the university crowd in central La Rochelle. So it's alive. The city's still alive late at night.
Got it. Last question. If you had to summarize La Rochelle in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Charming,
Okay.
authentic,
Okay.
rich in history.
I believe that is not a 3rd word. We'll go with history. Excellent. He's cheating. He is trying to cheat. Thinks I am not onto him. Jacob Kell from facilitateluxury.com. If we sent people over to facilitateluxury.com to find your best post on La Rochelle, where are we going to send them to?
If you send them to our blog, we keep periodic articles on different locations and different topics related to travel. And we published one months ago about La Rochelle that mentions a lot of the things that I talked about today. So it's a great resource. Go to facilitateluxury.com, click on blog, and you'll find Stepping Inside La Rochelle.
Excellent. And if they go there, when you say we, you don't just mean you and the mouse in your pocket, but facilitateluxury.com can also help facilitate a trip to La Rochelle or somewhere else in France, specifically probably if you're looking for luxury.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
And that's our specialty is custom travel. And we handpick everything based around your personality and your interests.
Excellent. Well, Jacob, thanks so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for France and specifically your love for La Rochelle.
Chris, thanks so much. I'm happy to be here.
In news of the community, I was pleased with some of the responses that we got for the show that we did on Kansas. Maria wanted to know if there's a way to buy a CD or a tape. I'm sorry, but there is not. I don't have a way of selling those right now. I think I may have used to like 10 years ago, but I think that service has shut down that I was using. Mary said, I really enjoyed all the information. I have lived in Kansas most of my life, but I learned a lot. I'm interested to know more. Thanks. And then I also heard from Jeff Olds, who's been on the show, who said, I enjoyed listening to the latest podcast. You covered a lot. I spent a few weekends there this spring. I know you can't mention everything, but I thought I could add a couple things. Speaking of centers, the geographic center of the 48 states is in Lebanon, Kansas. South of there on private property is the eidetic center of North America. You mentioned trail ruts. Fort Leonard has a detached part of the park, which is Santa Fe Trail Ruts. There's also ruts and museums at Alcove Springs and Marysville area. I also wanted to mention Fort Riley, still an active military base, which houses the U.S. Cavalry Museum. The original stables are still there. Custer's house on the base is also a historic site. One NPS site not mentioned is Nicodemus National Historic Site north of Hayes, the only remaining western town established by African Americans during the Reconstruction period. Finally, I wanted to mention Emporia State University, which has the National Memorial to Fallen Educators dedicated to teachers who lost their lives while teaching. It includes a one-room schoolhouse. I had no idea there even needed to be a national memorial to fallen educators. Thanks, Jeff. And then lastly, I heard from Shelley, who said, I just wanted to reach out and say thanks for the podcast on Kansas. I'm actually from Missouri, so I guess I really should have to say you must be reaching the bottom of the barrel if you're covering Kansas. Just a little Missouri-Kansas humor there, LOL. Anyway, I do appreciate that you're covering one of our area flyover states, so thanks. I should include a couple notes, though. You should mention that the Truman Library is temporarily closed for major renovations. I believe they said it would be closed for a year. Castle Rock Badlands is a really neat place, but is on an open but private land, and even if slightly damp, would require four-wheel drive. Also, there are lovely fields of sunflowers in the state this time of year, and this time of year being October, although slightly tempered this year due to heavy rains. There are other things to see and do, of course, but for the sake of brevity, I'll close for now. Thanks for doing what you do, and happy travels, Shelley. Well, thanks so much, all of you, and thanks, of course, to our guests this week and last week, talking about the great destinations which make the show possible. And with that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, do what Maria and Mary did and leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.